The day my marriage officially ended should have brought me relief, but instead it became the most humiliating day of my life, as I sat quietly in the family courtroom. In Columbus, Ohio, my husband, Nathan Brooks, leaned back in his chair with a smug smile and looked directly into my eyes before saying that I should get comfortable being homeless because I would not receive a single dollar from him. And a few people sitting behind us let out soft laughs that echoed louder in my mind than they probably intended. I refused to react because I had spent the last 16 years learning that people like Nathan enjoyed emotional reactions more than victories themselves. While his expensive attorney shuffled papers with complete confidence, I folded my hands in my lap, kept my breathing steady and reminded myself that the truth did not always reveal itself immediately, especially when someone had spent years building a life around deception and appearances. Looking at Nathan that morning, no one would have guessed what our marriage had really been like because he had mastered the art of looking like the perfect husband. He owned a successful construction company, donated money to local charities, smiled warmly at neighbors, and always introduced me as the woman who made his success possible. Yet behind the closed doors of our beautiful house, every compliment eventually turned into control. Every promise became another chain and every happy memory slowly faded beneath years of quiet emotional abuse. When we first met, Nathan was nothing like the man sitting across the courtroom from me, or at least that was what I believed at the time. I was working as a financial consultant with dreams of opening my own investment firm, and he constantly encouraged those ambitions until our son, Ethan, was born, after which he gently convinced me that staying home for a few years would be better for our family, promising that I could always return to my career whenever I wanted. At first, his suggestion sounded thoughtful and loving, but those few years quietly turned into more than a decade while his business expanded and my professional life disappeared one sacrifice at a time. Every school event, doctor appointment, family gathering, and household responsibility became my full-time job. And although I never complained because I believed we were building a future together, Nathan slowly began treating my sacrifices as if they had no value at all. By the time Ethan reached high school, Nathan rarely spoke to me with kindness, unless other people were watching, and even then his affection felt carefully rehearsed rather than genuine. He loved reminding me that everything we owned existed because of his hard work, while conveniently forgetting that I had spent years supporting his career, managing our home, raising our son, and standing beside him through every setback without asking for recognition. Everything changed the evening Ethan quietly asked me why his father smiled at his phone more often than he smiled at us, and that innocent question stayed with me long after dinner ended because children notice painful truths adults try desperately to ignore. A few days later, while cleaning Nathan's jacket before sending it to the dry cleaner, I discovered a receipt for an extravagant dinner that supposedly happened during an important business meeting, and deep inside I realized my marriage had already begun falling apart long before I found the evidence. I chose not to confront Nathan immediately because I wanted certainty instead of excuses, so I quietly watched his behavior while pretending nothing had changed, and every passing day revealed another piece of the painful truth that I had refused to see. For years he guarded his phone like it contained state secrets, invented last-minute business trips almost every weekend, and became strangely defensive whenever I asked even the simplest questions about his schedule. One rainy afternoon, fate removed every remaining doubt when Nathan rushed upstairs after receiving an urgent phone call and accidentally left his leather briefcase sitting beside the dining table with a second phone vibrating inside it. The screen lit up with a message that read, "I cannot wait until we never have to hide again," followed by a heart emoji, and although the sender name meant nothing to me, those few words shattered every illusion I had desperately tried to protect. For several minutes I remained completely still, listening to the rain tapping against the windows while years of memories replayed inside my mind with painful clarity, and I realized that my marriage had not ended because of another woman but because my husband had stopped respecting me long before she ever entered his life. Instead of crying or screaming, I calmly placed the phone back exactly where I found it because I understood that emotional reactions would only warn Nathan that his carefully constructed lies were beginning to collapse. Nearly 3 weeks later, Nathan finally announced that he wanted a divorce, and he delivered those words with the same cold expression he used during business meetings, as though ending 16 years of marriage required no more emotion than canceling a contract. I quietly asked whether another woman was involved, but instead of giving me an honest answer, he blamed our marriage, claiming we had grown apart, and I immediately recognized that he was rewriting our history to make himself feel less guilty. The divorce papers arrived less than 2 weeks later, and reading them felt like discovering that every sacrifice I had ever made had been erased with carefully chosen legal language designed to make me appear worthless, while making Nathan look like the only person responsible for our success. His attorney claimed I had contributed almost nothing financially during our marriage, demanded that our family home be sold immediately, and confidently argued that I deserved very little because I had supposedly chosen not to build a career, never realizing that the greatest mistake Nathan had made was believing he knew everything about my financial life. I hired an experienced divorce attorney named Victoria Hayes, and during our very first meeting she listened carefully without interrupting before asking whether Nathan knew everything about my finances, a question that caught me completely off guard because I had never considered that detail important. When I explained that I had inherited a private investment portfolio from my late grandmother years before our marriage and had quietly managed it ever since, Victoria smiled gently and told me to bring every document because separate assets protected correctly could completely change the direction of the case. My grandmother had spent decades buying small commercial properties throughout Ohio before the surrounding areas experienced rapid growth, and although she lived a simple life that fooled almost everyone, she believed real wealth should create security instead of attention. Before she passed away, she taught me how to invest patiently, avoid unnecessary risks, and never reveal the full extent of my finances to people who valued money more than character. Lessons I had quietly followed even after leaving my career to raise our family, while Nathan spent years buying luxury cars, expensive watches, and memberships at exclusive country clubs to impress strangers. I carefully reinvested every distribution from my inheritance with the help of trusted financial advisors who had known my grandmother for decades. The investments continued growing year after year without becoming part of our marital property, and by the time Nathan filed for divorce, those accounts had quietly grown into a fortune worth several $1 million that legally belonged only to me. Nathan never bothered asking questions about those investments because he had convinced himself that I depended entirely on his income, and his overconfidence became the greatest advantage I could have hoped for during the legal battle ahead. Every court filing he submitted focused on proving that I had no financial independence, while completely ignoring the possibility that I had been protecting my own future long before our marriage ever began falling apart. A week before our final court hearing, Victoria spread several folders across her conference table and carefully reviewed every financial statement before looking at me with complete confidence that we were finally ready. She explained that Nathan had made another serious mistake by failing to disclose one of his hidden business accounts during the discovery process, and at that moment I realized the courtroom would become much more than a place where our marriage officially ended, because it would also become the place where years of arrogance finally caught up with him. The courtroom felt unusually quiet on the morning of our final hearing, and although Nathan walked in wearing an expensive, tailored suit with the same confident smile he used to impress investors, I could already see that he believed the outcome had been decided before the judge even entered the room. He barely looked at me except to deliver one final insult under his breath, telling me to prepare for a very different lifestyle because I would soon discover what life looked like without his money. The hearing moved quickly as both attorneys presented financial records, property valuations, and arguments about our marriage, while Nathan's attorney confidently described me as a woman who had relied entirely on her husband for years without making any meaningful financial contribution. I remained silent throughout the discussion because I trusted Victoria completely, and every time Nathan glanced toward me with that smug expression, I reminded myself that patience often becomes the greatest weapon against arrogance. After nearly 2 hours, the judge appeared ready to conclude the proceedings, and Nathan relaxed comfortably in his chair as though he had already won everything he wanted from the divorce. Then, just before the judge announced a decision, Victoria calmly stood and asked permission to present one final piece of financial evidence that had only recently been confirmed through lawful discovery. instantly changing the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Victoria explained that Nathan had failed to disclose a private business account that had received large transfers over several years, and she presented detailed bank records showing the hidden transactions with dates, account numbers, and supporting financial documents that could not be disputed. Nathan's face lost its color almost immediately as his attorney hurriedly flipped through paperwork, searching for an explanation. But the evidence was undeniable, and the confidence that had filled his expression only moments earlier disappeared completely. The judge carefully reviewed the newly submitted documents before looking directly at Nathan and asking why those assets had been omitted from his mandatory financial disclosures. And for the first time since our divorce began, my former husband had no convincing answer to offer. The man who had promised I would leave the courtroom with nothing now sat frozen in complete silence while everyone watched the truth unfold, and I quietly realized that his greatest downfall had never been my strength because it had always been his own overwhelming pride. Nathan attempted to explain that the missing account was connected to unfinished business transactions, but every answer he gave created even more questions because the financial records clearly showed deliberate transfers that should have been disclosed months earlier during the divorce proceedings. The judge immediately ordered a complete forensic review of his finances before making a final decision, and the confident businessman, who had entered the courtroom expecting an easy victory, suddenly looked like a man watching everything he had built begin slipping through his fingers. Once the investigation was completed, several weeks later, the truth became impossible for Nathan to hide because investigators uncovered additional concealed investments, undeclared income, and property purchases that had never appeared in his financial disclosures. The court ruled that his dishonest conduct had seriously damaged his credibility, adjusted the division of the marital assets in my favor, and required him to pay substantial legal fees that could have been avoided if he had simply chosen honesty from the beginning. As for me, I finally revealed my own separate investment portfolio, and the courtroom fell silent when it became clear that I had quietly built financial security long before the divorce ever began without depending on Nathan's success. My inheritance and carefully managed investments remained legally protected, allowing me to keep complete ownership of assets worth millions of dollars, while the man who had mocked me for supposedly having nothing realized he had never truly understood the woman standing beside him for the last 16 years. Nathan's reputation suffered far more than his finances because word of the court findings spread quickly through both his professional and social circles, and many of the people who once admired his confidence began questioning the honesty behind his success. Ethan eventually saw the entire situation for what it really was, and although repairing the relationship with his father would take time, he told me he was proud that I had chosen dignity over revenge and truth over bitterness, words that meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. Looking back now, I understand that my greatest victory was never the court decision or the wealth I protected, because real freedom came from finally believing in my own worth after years of quiet emotional manipulation and self-doubt. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.